Tampa Bay Lightning have won the Stanley Cup.
The Kings have won their second Stanley Cup in 3 years.
It truly seems that now we start to move forward.
And that means that the Los Angeles Kings will select number 2 overall.
You have the opportunity at number 2. You're like, wait a minute.
It is Gabriel Velarde with his first goal. Lazar scores.
Peterson, big pass save. Wagner turns on the afterburner. Wagner scores. Maybe a shot. Alex follows. Back to Kopitar. He scores.
Hello, everyone. Welcome in day 2 of the 2020 NHL Draft LA Kings coverage. It's presented by GEICO. I'm Cameron Close. I'm alongside Jesse Cohen, the host of the All the Kings Men podcast, which, Jesse, I have to say, it's one of the top 5 podcasts on the LA Kings audio network.
Right behind the Rainy Day, right?
I would say Rainy Day's up there, but you'll get there, bud. I promise you. Well, an exciting day yesterday. Some would say an even more exciting day here on day 2. We have had trades. We have had picks upon picks. I think the 4 first picks by the LA Kings are from 4 different countries. That's something to write home about. So a lot going on, but everybody's talking about Quentin Byfield. He was selected at number 2 yesterday. Very exciting player that could factor into the Kings lineup very soon. 6'4". Oh, yeah. He says he rounds up. He's 6'5". He's listed at 6'4". Maybe we'll get a hockey DB to change that one of these days. Yeah. We'll see. But nonetheless, we were able to catch up with him a little bit earlier on today. Let's take a listen to what he had to say. Quentin Byfield had a big day yesterday, and he joins us now. Quentin, selected 2nd overall for the 2020 NHL Entry Draft. That makes you a King. Congratulations. I assume yesterday was a pretty exciting one for you.
Yeah, no, for sure. Waiting for that day the whole life, and, to be a King, super proud, and I'm definitely pumped to get started.
We've heard a lot of different analysts compare you to an Anze Kopitar type of player, which probably excites many of our Kings fans here. Is that who you would maybe relate yourself with? Are there any other players that you model your play style after?
Yeah, no, I think so. I think Anze Kopitar and Evgeny Malkin, I've drawn some comparisons to those guys, and I think that's just a compliment to my game, and how good those 2 players are. Future Hall of Famers, and both champions, and I think they're both really talented players, and just being able to compare myself or get compared to them is definitely super humbling. I think those are 2 great comparisons.
Quentin, ordinarily the offseason would be a lot shorter. The draft process would be a lot more condensed. With all of the online elements, and when did you get a sense that the Kings were taking you at number 2? Was it a total shock yesterday?
Yeah, no, honestly, it was a surprise for me. I had no idea. So, I was a little nervous sitting there in my seat, but super excited that they selected me, and happy to go there and can't wait to get started. But it was all a big surprise, so it was very good.
Well, along those lines, I noticed yesterday, Jesse, that all of you, maybe the top 10 picks, you guys had the jerseys at your house. So were there 4 or 5 different teams' jerseys sitting on your kitchen table, or was there one you weren't allowed to look at? How did that work?
Yeah, no, honestly, I think I had 2 jerseys, and I only saw the Ottawa jersey, so I was kind of thinking, Ottawa, but then there's another box. So, it was a good surprise that they sent me the jersey hats, for me and my family. So that was a really nice surprise, but I only had those 2 jerseys.
That brings us to jersey numbers, Quentin, and you were number 55 for Sudbury. Any thoughts on what number you might wear in the NHL?
Yeah, definitely 55 again if I'm able to, but I think that's kind of my go-to number, and I've been rocking that for my whole life, so I gotta keep that going.
Is there a story behind 55?
There's a little bit. When I was growing up, my favorite team used to be the Pittsburgh Penguins. That's like way back, and I used to play defenseman, and Sergei Gonchar was my favorite player. So, all the guys wanted, number 71, 87 back then. I probably wanted that too, but Sergei Gonchar was my guy, so I just went with 55.
There you go.
So one thing that came up yesterday, we learned you've never been to LA before. You've never been to California before, but I'm going to imagine that you did a little research even before the draft on Southern California. What do you know? What are you looking forward to?
I'm looking forward to the nice weather. I was in Sudbury for 2 years now, and that's a little chilly down there. So it'll be a nice little change up in weather, and get to enjoy the beaches and some very nice golf courses there as well. So I know a little bit on that side.
You're wearing the white suit and your trademark bow tie. Any leads on bow tie services out here in LA?
No, not yet, but I'll definitely be able to find some really nice places down there. Get a couple new ones.
Well, somewhat of a strange year for you, but I'm sure the excitement was unparalleled yesterday. Congratulations, Quentin. We're looking forward to seeing you here in LA.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
So thanks again to Quentin for joining us. Jesse, quite the fashionista. You've noticed everyone's been talking about his bow ties, and you had to get that out of him.
Well, look, LA Kings' own Daryl Evans is known for his fashion sense, and I've actually been down to downtown LA where he gets some of the fabric for his suits. So, just wanted to let Quentin know that there are options available out here in Southern California.
I like your look. I think you could be a suspenders guy. You look like if I was a boxer, you'd be in my corner.
That's the look I'm going for.
Yeah, you'd be the guy. I don't listen to you for the first 4 rounds.
Sure.
And then on round 5, I get the knockout. It's because of you.
Yeah, I'm actually going for editor of an old-timey newspaper.
Well, speaking of, you need an extra guy in your corner, and we have one today. Our third panelist on the show, John Hoven of the Mayor's Manor, is going to be in and out joining us, and we'll bring him in for the first time today. John, I am sure you have been glued to the TV over the last day and a half now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a little bit of a different draft experience, obviously having to do everything online and try to juggle multiple screens, but it's been an enjoyable, 12, 24 hours so far.
Well, you said the Kings were taking Byfield. Jesse said it. They take Byfield. A lot of people thought they would. When was that decision made? Tim Stützle was thrown around. How long have the Kings known they were taking Byfield, do you think? And what can you tell us about your thoughts on this pick now that it is cemented?
Yeah, from what I was able to gather here over the last couple of days, looks like the official decision came down sometime here in September. So there was a lot of work that went into it. I had reported right after the draft lottery that they were leaning Byfield, but you still want to give the scouts time to go through that. So Mark Yannetti and of course the whole staff, they went through a process, and each scout watched a particular number of games of both players live, and then they watched them on tape, and then they went through their interview process as well. And so, they just have to go through the mechanics of deciding that. And they were afforded a lot of time in this particular case as well. So unlike past years where they're trying to juggle it in between scouting trips and games, they had, several months that were available to them and really helped them come to the ultimate decision. And as Mark Yannetti mentioned to me recently, really at the end of the day, it comes down to what Rob Blake wants to do and how he wants to build the team. And that's why Quentin Byfield was the perfect selection for the LA Kings.
John, you also predicted a defenseman being their pick with 35 in the second round. They wind up taking Helge Grans. Was that your opinion, or was that based on information you'd heard from your sources?
Well, I'll say it's a good mixture of both. If you follow, it's hard to say where one begins and the other one ends. But if you follow what the Kings' needs are, if you look at their prospect pool, of course, they're ranked among the top 5 prospect pools in the league right now. And the one thing that they need that they really can use would be some strength on defense. You have what I call the ABCDs on defense right now. You have Anderson, Bjornfoot, Clegg, and Dursey, and those are the 4 that are leading the way. Cole Holt's coming up right behind there. But they wanted to sort of strengthen their position on the blue line. And so given the number of defensemen that were available and how you break the draft down into certain tiers, it looked to me like the Kings were going to be taking a defenseman with that first selection, number 35 there in the second round.
Well, we've got Grans and Faber adding to that alphabet. So now we just need somebody with an E in their last name, right, to start us off?
Yeah, it'll make my answers longer. I don't think anybody wants that. But, yeah, with Faber, you're getting a kid who Coach Wroblewski, the new coach of the Ontario Reign, he certainly knows them well. And I was in touch with Robo here over the last couple of weeks trying to gather information, not only about Faber, but other prospects that maybe he has seen and that he might be familiar with. But in Faber, they're getting an elite skater, someone who's very efficient at moving the puck and a great competitor, somebody who's very athletic. And the name that came up a number of times in talking to various people was Mikey Anderson. And for anybody who follows me on Twitter or online, they know that if you mention Mikey Anderson's name, my ears are going to perk up.
From what we understand, to make these trades happen, and the Kings they haven't been too shy about that, at least here today in the second day of the draft.
No, and this is sort of a secondary, tertiary level detail, but both of these guys right-handed shot defensemen, and that is something that the Kings are, to John's point, talking about the organizational needs. You don't need to have lefty-righty all the time, but the Kings like to have that. Your left-hand defenseman playing on the left side, your right-hand defenseman playing on the right side. Currently, Spence and Dursey, both right-shot defensemen. Now you add Faber, now you add Helge Grans. Moving forward in the future, you can parse out your, when these guys are slated to hit the league. You don't have to worry about looking to other teams, looking to other organizations to shore up the right side of your defense. Currently, Doughty, Walker, and Roy taking care of that at the major level. And like I said, Dursey, Spence, now 2 more right shot defensemen.
Well, I'm sure we'll talk about it with a few of our panelists coming up later on. We'll have Lisa Dillman of The Athletic. We'll have Jack Jablonski and Zach Dooley, the Reign Insider. And of course, we'll talk about it with John. But maybe the biggest news today is the trade that the Kings make, not for a pick, but for a player. Elias Anderson coming over from the New York Rangers. It's a 1-for-1 swap. The 60th overall selection goes to New York, and Anderson comes to the LA Kings.
Yeah, and I've been scrambling to sort of fill in the holes on this story. He was allegedly selected or highlighted by the Kings. They would have liked to have taken him in 2017. He went 7th overall. And then, of course, Velarde dropped down to 11th, where the Kings selected him. Things didn't go great for him in New York. It's not clear what the full story is there, but it looks like maybe the situation was mishandled by both sides. But his father is a scout for the LA Kings, so presumably they know what happened. They know the kid. They're familiar with the story. So you bring him in. He turns 22 in a week. He's a center, apparently very good, defensively responsible. He is the player from Sweden that threw his silver medal over the glass. So obviously passionate, cares about winning. I think we have the mayor back. Mayor, any thoughts on, John, any thoughts on the trade for Elias Anderson?
I think it's a fantastic trade for the LA Kings. You go back to the 2017 draft. He's sitting there at the top of the board. If he would have slid down, there's a possibility that he might have been the pick for the LA Kings instead of Gabe Velarde. So you end up with 2 guys now inside the top 15 from that draft class. As you were saying there, Jesse, things didn't work out in New York, and that's okay. Sometimes things don't work out with a particular organization. And I had a scout tell me earlier today, maybe it's similar to the situation with Eric Chernak here in Los Angeles, where he was able to move on to Tampa Bay and he's having a pretty fine career. I do like the fact that, his father is a scout with the LA Kings as well. So that means that they know all the insides. They know the real details. Forget about whatever's going to come out publicly. They know where the rub might have been there. And the Kings obviously felt comfortable to spend a second-round pick that they really had coveted in this year's draft, to spend that draft capital to go out and get this player who's still just 21 years old. I think it's a fantastic trade for the LA Kings. It's a home run deal, and it fits the curve in terms of where you are on the age side. They're adding a player who's a little bit further along developmental-wise than if they were to have taken somebody with that draft pick. Love the deal.
Well, I'll ask you to expound upon what you said about the Kings coveting that 60th overall pick, John. A lot of people thought the Kings are going to make all those picks. They're not going to move around. They have that second-round draft capital, and they're going to use it. But a lot of moves happening. How difficult are those moves to make? We've heard that you got to make quick decisions. You got to be quick on your toes and kind of know what you want going into your pick. Clearly, the Kings have been hard at work and maybe racking up the long-distance phone bill here this afternoon.
Well, I probably have used up 2 or 3 batteries on my cell phone here over the last 48 hours, just trying to understand what the Kings were up to, what was available out there. And in talking to a number of sources, they just kept repeating the same thing over and over. It was really difficult to make moves. From what I understand, the Kings were trying to move up into the latter half of the first round last year, call it somewhere between picks 25 and 30. That would have cost them all 3 of their second-round draft picks. Just way too much of a price, at least from the Kings' perspective, to make those type of moves. From what I was told, they were looking to get a defenseman and a forward in the second round. And so to be able to get 2 defensemen, obviously they moved up to get Faber, but to get 2 defensemen and then to grab their a forward, a former first-round draft pick just a few years ago with the pick there, the last pick there in the second round. I think that's ultimately why they were able to go ahead and move that pick at 60. They were able to get everything they wanted, a perfect second round. I think if you're Rob Blake or if you're Marty, I'm sure we'll find out what they have to say later. But they have to be pleased with Grans, Faber, and picking up the sweep.
Well, I want to ask you as well, John, about I was following your Twitter yesterday, you had a list of maybe it was 5 or 6 players. You said if they're available at a certain place in the first round, I think the Kings would be motivated to move up and maybe try to snag one of those. That obviously wasn't the case. You're saying they had a perfect second round. I imagine maybe they saw what was on the board here in the second round and said, we don't need to necessarily move up and get another first round pick here. Of course, that was yesterday.
Well, look, they from what I was able to gather, they loved Gooley, the kid who went early in the first round. There was another defenseman who also went. And again, it comes back to what's the trade-off. You look at what the Kings have been able to do in the second round. Guys like Cale Clegg, Shaquille Thomas, Jared Anderson, Dillman, Tyler Toffoli. Are these kids that you want to trade? Are that caliber of player? Do you want to move not 1, but 2, maybe 3 of those players just in order to move into the first round and grab a defenseman? No. They thought that they would be somebody sitting there at 35, and sure enough, that player was sitting there at 35 in terms of a defenseman. He's one of the 4 or 5 players, like you mentioned, that we thought that they would be looking to get at 35. So in hindsight, would they have traded 35, 45, and the 60 pick? So would they have traded the forward plus Faber plus Grans just to move up to grab somebody there in the late first round? No, it even in hindsight, it wouldn't have been worth it. So like I said, I'm sure that Mark Yannetti and Rob Blake are pretty happy with the haul that they were able to get today.
Looking at last year, I think the Kings right away, everybody realized they had a pretty exceptional draft. Obviously, when you're picking at number 5 and Alex Turcotte, you're going to get an excellent player no matter who you pick. But then they get a guy in Tobias Bjornfot, who everybody was excited about, and a late first round pick ends up making the team out of camp. And Arthur Kaliev goes early in the second round. It was a very, very exciting draft over the course of the 2 days. End of the day today, what are we going to be looking at in comparison to last year's success?
Well, last year was what I would consider to be some classic Mark Yannetti draft maneuvering there. When you look at what was available with the Bjornfot pick, they took a calculated risk. They really didn't want to draft Bjornfot that high, but they had 4 or 5 players they targeted that they thought would still be sitting there. And sure enough, one of them was an Arthur Kaliev. So things worked out perfectly. And I think you have to really give a tip of the cap to Mark Yannetti and the entire staff for what they were able to accomplish then. It's a little bit early now just to look because the entire draft hasn't completed at the time that we're talking right now. But I love the fact that again that they picked up 2 solid defensemen there in the second round. They needed to add to their defensive core, like we talked about earlier. They're not their core at the NHL level, but their pool of prospects, and they were able to do that. And then also to be able to add a forward at 21, that age distribution, you just can't say enough about that. When you look at all these players, you don't want everybody kind of coming due at the same time. You want an opportunity to work in some of those players. It's one of the reasons why it was so important to get Mikey Anderson even though it was limited, to give him some NHL experience last season. One of the reasons why you wanted Gabe Vilardi in the lineup last year. You want those kids developing this year because coming up right behind them, you have Alex Turcotte, you have Madden, who's probably a couple years away, but you have Shaquille Thomas, who could see some NHL action even in the second half of this season. You have Cale Clegg, who's going to be working into the lineup. So age distribution is important, and the Kings were able to address both of those needs right now, age distribution and then also their defensive strength.
Well, we'll talk more about how these players might factor into the Kings lineup, whether it be this season, the next season, or even the season after that, as we move along here today. John, we'll bring you back in a bit. Coming up next, Jack Jablonski will join us. We'll talk about some of these maybe second, third, fourth selections that the Kings made here this afternoon. We'll be right back. Stick around.
We love the new apartment.
There is a bit of a clogging problem.
At least GEICO makes it easy to bundle our renters and car insurance.
For bundling made easy, go to geico.com.
I think pretty much all his life was, one goal, and that was, be a professional hockey player in NHL.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the 2005 National Hockey League entry draft.
My draft was right after the lockout in 05. They held it in a hotel ballroom in Ottawa. And my season was already going in Sweden, so I didn't go to Ottawa.
The 2005 National Hockey League draft.
He was in Sweden, and we were back home in Slovenia. We never went through this, That was the first time for us, and it was wow.
Once they say your name and, show the jersey, it was an emotional day. Everybody was crying on the phone. I couldn't hold my tears back. It's pretty cool and pretty special.
Center, number 11, Andrzej Kopitar. Okay, now here's Kopitar, reach, gets to the front and scores. Here's Kopitar, moving it along. He scored! Kopitar in overtime.
Coming from Slovenia, not a big hockey country, it's highly unlikely that you're going to make it to the NHL.
But like his grandfather's listed as his.
Welcome back. The day continues. Another pick for the Kings during that break. That kind of timed out perfectly.
It did time out perfectly. While we were gone, the Kings select Finnish goaltender, although born in Edmonton, Alberta, from what I'm reading. But Juho Markkanen, currently playing in the Saipa system where Jacob Uvrari has been loaned to. So one more player, one more goalie, one more Finn.
Seems like the Kings always try to find a goalie somewhere in the middle of the draft. Yep. And I'd say out of all of the franchises in the National Hockey League, LA has to be in the top 3 as far as developing these.
Yeah, we're a bit of a goalie factory.
Yeah, I would say so. Jack Jablonski has been joining you on the All the Kings Men podcast, and I've been listening. He's been doing some great interviews. Kind of, you don't necessarily need any more information on the Quentin Byfields and Tim Stutzels of the world, but these guys that are getting picked now, we don't know that much about them. Jack's our guy for that. How are you, Jack?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, guys.
It's our pleasure, Jack. Now, as Cameron said, we had you on All the Kings Men talking to Rod Bracewell from the US NTDP, talking to Krister Kasarainen from Finland, and Sixter Funquist from Sweden. Now, 3 of the Kings picks today have come from those areas that we talked about. So why don't you go ahead and walk us through what we know about Helge Grans first?
Yeah, well, Helge Grans is an extremely exciting pick. He's one of those guys who provides a skill set offensively that you don't often see at his age. One of the things that he's been looked at is a guy who has identical skill set to Andre Burakovsky. Now, Burakovsky is obviously a forward, but his ability to move the puck and create plays is something that the Kings are going to be extremely excited about. Defensively, he's a little raw. He's got some time to work on that and just be a little bit more physical. He's 6'3", just over 200 pounds. So he's a little bit of a project, but a guy who is definitely going to be someone that the Kings like to see offensively, which, in the time to come, Drew Doughty's obviously not going to be at the level that he's been at for the past years. And this is a guy that has the potential to maybe fill that role a little bit.
We know the Kings care about character and personality, et cetera. Brock Faber, they traded up to get him. We talked to Rod Bracewell about him and really raved about his character and his personality. What else should we know about Brock Faber?
Well, he's a guy. So the big thing here is both Helge Grans and Brock Faber are both right-handed defensemen. and they're two completely different players. Now, Brock, he isn't the highest skill set, but he's one of those guys who's very hard to play against, very smart, and one of the guys on the ice who can almost see the play ahead of what's going on. He tries to model himself like Charlie McAvoy. Now, McAvoy's probably a little bit more offensively talented, but this guy's, Faber is one of the people that his attention to details is through the roof, and his IQ is one of those things where he's going to be able to excel because he can make the right play at the right time.
How can you not be a hockey player if your name is Brock Faber? That's a hockey name, and that's a shutdown defenseman type. That's like a stocky guy that you're coming down the wing, and you're like, I'm going to take the other side. I'm going to take the other wing. Like Brock Faber, that's a guy
he's Mr.
I definitely don't want to. Yeah, Brock Faber.
As a broadcaster, you've got to love the opportunity to say Brock Faber.
I love it. He's going to wear a single-digit number, and you're just not going to get past him on the way. Well, if I can stay on names, well, you guys on your podcast have been talking about what these prospects are going to bring to the organization. Zach and I were talking about names, and they got one of our favorite ones, Alex Laferriere. Maybe if you woke up a little late today, you thought, wow, the number 1 overall pick fell to us all the way at what, number 83 overall. That's not the case, but they were pretty excited about him on television from what I was seeing, at least. What can you tell us about this guy, Jack?
Yeah, well, Laferriere is, unfortunately, he's got an identical name, so he might be living in the shadow. Hopefully he can outdo that in the years to come. But he's a right wing, 6 foot, 170, so he's got a lot of room to build into his frame. He's going to be one of those guys that needs a few years. The last year he played in the USHL and had over a point a game. So Mr. Consistent in that aspect. But overall, great hands, natural goal scorer, one of the guys who you would categorize as a sniper. The Kings have been looking for that for a long time. And, Laferriere is a little bit out in terms of trying to make himself a king in LA, but he needs work on his skating and passing, and that's kind of what held him back to the 3rd round this draft.
Rounding out the picks for the day, Jack, taken in the 3rd round at number 66, right wing Kasper Siemantavel. We did talk to Krister about him. What do we need to know about the tiny sniper from Finland? I shouldn't say tiny.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting pick, and I'm excited that the Kings took him because he's very high end and probably one of the most skilled players in the draft. The unfortunate thing is he was a little bit injury prone, and he's one of the guys who is, you might want to categorize him as boom or bust or high risk, high reward. He's 5'9", 170, so he's not the biggest frame. He's one of those guys who has the skill to be able to play in the top 6 in the NHL and be a very offensive-minded producing forward. The only thing is, if the offense doesn't necessarily translate to North America and he can't find that in the NHL, he might not be able to stay up there. So he's a guy who can snipe. He's a guy who can shoot and make plays. It's just a matter of, can he get around with the size and be able to make plays in the offensive zone against, the larger defensemen in the NHL.
Well, as of now, the Kings have 3 picks left on the board. Jack, we'll let you get back to watching the draft. I appreciate your analysis. Appreciate you coming in.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks, Jack.
Let's bring back in John Alvin from the Mayor's Manor. Let's get him in here and break some of that down. There's a lot of these picks that the Kings have here in the 2nd, 2 in the 2nd, 2 in the 3rd, and now they've got a few more coming up. But they get the goalie. Were you expecting them to take a goalie, John?
I was. I had goalies targeted for the 2nd pick there in the 4th round, or in the 5th at the latest. I know Jesse was mentioning a moment ago that he was born in Edmonton, played his career overseas. That's because his father is a former goaltender there for the Edmonton Oilers. So there's your connection. In talking with a couple of the Kings people, it looks like that they think this kid can still grow. He is listed at 146 pounds. I find that extremely hard to believe. So we'll try to get that confirmed throughout the program. But there's plenty of room there to grow. Very technical goaltender from what I understand. And we always have to talk bloodlines when we're talking about players in hockey.
I'm looking at that now. 6'2", 140. That's like a skeleton that you put on your front lawn.
It can't be real.
Yeah, that's not right. He's going to wear those pads over there if that's how big he is. Then well,
let's maybe go 164. Maybe just two numbers were inverted or something.
Either way, maybe put on a few pounds, something like that. The Kings, sure. I mentioned it before we went to the last break. They have one of the best goaltending development systems. It seems like it's just the next man up mentality at all times. Cal Peterson, who I've raved about, he's probably, in my opinion, the best player I've seen come through Ontario in my years with the AHL club, and then all of a sudden he leaves. You think, oh man, we're going to struggle. And then Matt Villalta basically replicates that play that Cal had before him. So what do the Kings do so well? How do they scout this position so well? And then how do they grow the players so well?
Well, you just mentioned it right there, Cam. First of all, it starts with scouting. We talk a lot about Mark Yannetti, but he has a full complement of staff all throughout the world, really. And the Kings do an outstanding job of scouting goaltenders and scouting players, not just here in North America, both in the U.S. and Canada, but also all across Europe. Plus, you have the international tournaments where you get exposed to certain players. You have Christian Ruutu, of course, patrolling all of Europe, and there's a number of people over there. And then you get into development, and that's really where the Kings have invested a lot of money over the last 5 to 8 years, is beefing up their development staff, not only on with their forwards and guys like Jared Stoll and Craig Johnson and Mike Donnelly and all those former NHL players, but you just look at the stability there with Bill Ranford and the number of guys that he's had underneath him. In terms of goalies, though, in the pipeline, you certainly want to give credit to Cal Peterson. I named him the heir apparent to Jonathan Quick. Basically, within 24 hours of the Kings signing him, they were thrilled to death when they picked him up as an unrestricted free agent. And Cal's been everything as advertised and more. And former coach Mike Stothers absolutely loved him. Said he would have named him the captain there in Ontario. But the two names, if you're going to follow goaltenders in the LA Kings pipeline, the two names to really keep an eye on would be Jacob Ingham, who's going to be up with Ontario this year, had an outstanding career in the Ontario Hockey League, and then Lucas Perrick, who was drafted out of the Czech Republic, but really is playing with the WHL Spokane team right now. Those are the two guys to keep an eye on. I have them as 1A and 1B in the pipeline now that Cal Peterson's been promoted full-time to the NHL.
John, you mentioned earlier that you want to stagger your players' ages so that they're not all hitting the NHL at the same time. When it comes to goaltending depth, you've got Peterson now at 26. Villalta, I believe, is 21. Ingham and Parajik are like 20 and 19, I think. You've got Rennick. Now you're adding another one. I mean, at some point, especially with goalies, there just are so many spots available. How many goalies is too many goalies? When do you run the risk of filling the cupboard with too many guys?
Well, you really only have the spot for three goaltenders if you don't consider the National Hockey League to be where you're grooming a prospective goalie, right? Because goaltenders, first of all, they develop much slower than positional players. Traditionally in the NHL, goalies and defensemen, you want to look at around 25 years old. But this has become a much younger league here over the last 5 years. But from a goaltender's perspective, you only have two spots at the American League, and then you typically loan one of those guys out to your ECHL affiliate, which is exactly what the Kings have been doing for a number of years. So it's one of the reasons that Cole Keller wasn't extended a contract recently when he was an RFA, had to make room for guys like Ingham coming in. And then you mentioned there at the college level, there's a goalie there as well, and David Hernack. So there are a number of guys. How many are too many? I mean, that's impossible to say. The more the merrier, because until one of them hits and one of them is going to take the place of who's going to take the place of Cal Peterson 5 years from now or 8 years from now. Until then, you just keep stacking them, and if you develop them, they become assets that you can use in a trade to fill maybe another hole that you have, whether that's on defense or even up front with the forward.
Well, as much as I love some good goalie talk, John, we're running up on time. We'll bring you back in a little bit.
Talk to you then, boys.
I want to send us to break here. We have Lisa Dillman coming in next from The Athletic. Before we go, can I complain about something real quick?
You can complain about whatever you want.
The logo on my computer is much smaller than the logo on yours. So I don't know if we can do something about that, but I'd like a large Kings logo to block, the brand that nobody knows what that is. But the big, big Kings logo. I want the biggest one we can find. I want it on my computer when we come back. When we come back, we'll have Lisa Dillman. We'll see you then.
We love our new home.
There's so much space.
But we have ants.
Expired. Expired. Expired.
It's a lot of house. I hope you can keep it clean.
At least GEICO makes bundling our home and car insurance easy.
For bundling made easy, go to GEICO.com.
Walker makes a second play.
talking about the trade, I think that's really, catch.
Couldn't find a logo for the computer, but I think that the hat is far more important for both of us. So
hats are definitely important, Cam.
It's all about size here on the LA Kings 2020 NHL Draft Showcase here, presented by GEICO. Next up, we're going to bring in from The Athletic, Lisa Dillman, who has been covering the Kings for, well, all through this off season that we haven't had much to talk about. And now finally it's heated up. Lisa, let's jump right into it. A few trades here today, but one involving a player. Elias Anderson comes over from the New York Rangers. What's your take there?
Well, I think it's fascinating. This is a player that 3 years ago went 7th overall. And you look at the players that went after him. And at 21, he's trying to rehabilitate his career. And what a better place to do it in the organization that employs his father. He has plenty of Swedish countrymen that he can be familiar with. He must have said, "I'm super happy, super psyched," like 4 or 5 times on the Zoom call we did with him from Sweden. It's like, I think people have to realize you have to be patient. That the curve of development just varies from player to player so much. And this is a golden chance for him. So, we've heard of players that can take this new lease on life and make it work for them, for sure. Yeah, the funny thing is, I thought the call was hilarious. He said he wasn't watching the draft. He was eating dinner at home in front of his television set, watching something else. And he got a phone call, and he said he thought it was from his bank. Now, if I get a phone call saying it's from Chase, I don't answer it, first of all. But he did, and that's how I found out he was traded. So I thought that was kind of amusing. It wasn't a spam phone call. It was a call that kind of changed his life and hopefully get his game back on track.
Lisa, so much of an organization's expectations of a player are loaded into where they're taken in the draft. But he's still only, he turns 22 in a week on the 13th.
Yeah.
Is he close enough to his draft year that he still carries all of that potential from the Kings' perspective? Or has he now gotten moved far enough away from the draft where he's sort of like an undrafted player that they're acquiring via free agency?
That's actually a good way to put it. If you look at it, this is the Gabe Vilardi draft. And at this time, I don't even know what day it is anymore. This draft has gone on so long, but a little bit more than a year ago, we were hearing questions about Gabe Vilardi's future. I was getting peppered with it. I'm sure you were. People were saying this kid is, they were writing him off, and look what he's been able to do. And obviously a completely different situation dealing with an injury as opposed to something in New York that just didn't work out. But I think you can really view it in that way. It's like they're getting a free agent at very little cost. And once again, this is the value of stockpiling these draft picks. This is where their work, the Kings' work, pays off on a day like this.
Another trade happening before the draft I want to get your take on, Lee. So Oli Mata comes to the LA Kings. That's a 2-time Stanley Cup champion. This is a young player, a young defenseman that comes over with quite a bit of experience.
Yeah, he just turned 26, and it was like basically the Chicago Blackhawks and the Kings helping each other out with their respective problems. The Kings with their need on D, the Blackhawks in a world of hurt with their cap situation. This is a player that they were would have bought out probably if this deal had not come to fruition. I know the Kings were watching Ole quite closely during the play-in round, especially, and were impressed with how he performed against Edmonton and kind of kept an eye on him as an alternative. You're right, he's young. He just turned 26. Cancer survivor. I mean, he's 5 years in remission from thyroid cancer, and I think a lot of people forget that too. I'm looking forward to my colleagues in Pittsburgh just tell me great things about him. A great character player, somebody that can help mold the young D. People have suggested he could be a mentor to Rasmus Skapari for sure. So I think it's like these moves are not overly costly. They make a lot of sense, and I think they're worth a gamble.
Lisa, in the build-up to the 2012 Cup run, the Kings acquired players like Willie Mitchell, who had some injury issues in his career, Justin Williams, who people felt was maybe a little bit injury-prone. They picked up Rob Scuderi. They're picking up guys that they either overpaid a little bit for or that were seen as, I don't want to say reclamation projects because that maybe cast too dark a pall on them. But now with the acquisition of Ole Mata, again, two-time Stanley Cup winner, so he's not exactly a reclamation project, but he gets traded away from Pittsburgh in a sort of a salary dump. He gets traded away from Chicago in a bit of a salary dump. Now, Elias Anderson. Are the Kings starting to try and mine the rest of the teams in the league for those, again, for lack of a better phrase, reclamation projects, guys that are maybe more talented than you'd think they were, given how available they are?
Well, there is that. And, this name is going to probably cause shivers or down people's spines. One of our readers texted me, or I think he actually tweeted it. He mentioned Nikita Sherbeck. And I went, ooh. Because, he came in. I think you guys all remember. They got picked up on waivers. Once again, we used the word reclamation project. Mm-hmm. Scored in his first game. It might have been his first shift. And then after that, see ya. So, these two cases are not that hopefully, but again, it's worth the risk. It's worth the gamble. The Kings are in a position where they have the luxury of patience. They don't have to force their prospects along faster than they need to. They don't have to fast track them. They can take their time, and there's deals around. There's deals around with other teams that are in tough cap situations.
Lisa Dillman of The Athletic, which you can get for like $1 a month right now, which is a great deal. That's less than a weekday ticket at the Honda Center to the Anaheim Ducks. So you can get that. That's up, which is nothing either. So that's unbelievable. Go on, do yourself a favor, get a subscription to The Athletic. You won't regret it. Lisa, we'll let you get back to maybe the longest NHL draft in history.
I've aged. People have joked that it's going to be over by Thanksgiving. Is that Canadian Thanksgiving, which is soon, or American Thanksgiving?
Yeah,
it's
you
crazy,
know what?
but
if you told me that we could have a 10-day draft 5 months ago, I'd take it. So I guess I'm complaining now, but
same here.
Yeah. All right, Lisa, thanks a lot for joining us.
Thanks,
Lisa. Thank you for having me on. Take care.
Excellent. Well, let's bring John Hoven back in. I want to talk about what I've wanted to talk about all day, which is the Ontario Reign. I love them. You love them. We know you love them too. And John, we see you at those games all the time. So a lot of these players, people are thinking, well, when are they going to factor into the Kings? A lot of these are very young players, and some of them are going to need time to go through the Ontario Reign to use the American Hockey League. They're going to be practicing right here in El Segundo, so you're going to be right next to the Kings, but then maybe playing some games in Ontario. Who do you see making an impact on the Reign? We know the Byfields of the world are going to try to push for the Kings. There may be some other surprises, but what about the Reign?
Well, first off, let's mention that Byfield and Kalia, the two names that people love to talk about, are not eligible for the Ontario Reign this year. They're either going back to the Ontario Hockey League to play another year there, or they can stay in the National Hockey League. You can get maybe a cup of coffee for 5 or 8 games before you have to hit the 10-game mark and go back. But those are two names not to look for in Ontario this year. So Ontario lineup this year, there's a lot to like about it. You're getting Alex Turcotte, who's coming in, obviously, from the University of Wisconsin. School just wasn't his thing. Ready to turn pro. He's committed. He's a number 1 draft pick. You normally aren't going to get a number 1 draft pick 1 year away because most college guys stick around for 2 or 3 years. So this is exciting for the Kings development staff, who we talked about earlier, to get their hands on him. Also his coach, and Robo's coming with him as well. So it's a great opportunity for Alex Turcotte. You have Tyler Madden, who was the kid that was acquired in the deal for Tyler Toffoli, who some people thought that was one of the top Canucks prospects. So the Kings did well in that trade as well. Plus you have Cole Holtz, the kid coming in on defense from Penn State, who could be a fast riser, another mid-round draft pick who, like a Mikey Anderson, who could burst onto the scene here. Had a fantastic year at Penn State. He should do wonders on the blue line there. And then Jacob Ingham, who I mentioned earlier as well. And let's not leave out, of course, Shaquille Thomas, big-time goal scorer, very versatile player, can play center, can play wing, scored the golden goal for Team Canada at the most recent World Juniors. And he also played 28 minutes on defense last year as well. So, Robo, if you're listening and you need help on the blue line, give Shaquille Thomas a call. He'll be happy to suit up there and play some defense as well.
John, let's talk about the contract limit. I know they're not exactly pressed up against it. The Mata trade was a 1-for-1 in terms of contracts, so that took care of that. And I understand they're walking away from a few RFAs down specifically at the Ontario Reign level. Just saw word today that they'll be offering contracts to Strand and Imama. But with the acquisition of Elias Anderson and the potential of perhaps signing a few players that they drafted today, maybe just one, to an ELC, what are we looking at in terms of contract limit? And, you know, we asked this about the goalies, and I'll ask you again about the skaters, and there really isn't a good answer, which is, when do you have too many guys?
Well, that's where you can't have too many guys, actually, because it's difficult to give those guys ice time. And you saw that with Sean Dursey last year. Here's a guy who was included in the Jake Muzzin deal along with Carl Grundstrom. Grundstrom was getting a fair amount of time splitting his opportunities between the National League and the American Hockey League. Sean Dursey, on the other hand, found it difficult at times to work his way into the lineup. This was a second-round draft pick by Toronto, was highly coveted by Los Angeles that same draft year, so they were eager and excited to get him in the Muzzin deal, and then he's having a difficult time finding ice time there in Ontario last year. That's one of the reasons that you saw guys like Marcus Phillips go back. Marcus Phillips, here's a kid who worked his way onto the top pairing at the World Junior Championships and then was sent back to play his overage year in the Canadian Junior Leagues, in part because they wanted to make sure that they had time available. I think they at one point had 9 defensemen there in Ontario. So it does create a log jam back to that age distribution at certain times. With certain players, you have the opportunity either to send them back to Europe or you have an opportunity to send them back, to the Canadian Junior Leagues. But when you get a player like Bjornfoot, and he's going to come over and he's going to spend a full year with you, now you have to start clearing out some of those guys, in order to create room for them. So the Kings, while, like you mentioned there, Jesse, while they might not be necessarily up against the contract limit, any GM around the league for any of the 31 teams is always looking at how many contracts does he have. They want to leave about 2, 3, maybe 4 spots open so that if something becomes available, they know that they have the flexibility to be able to do that. And that's one of the reasons why the Kings walked away from a few guys like Sheldon Rempel, who they didn't offer a contract to after just signing him as an unrestricted free agent out of college a couple years ago. Contract limits are a real thing, and you have to pay attention to them.
John, we'll bring you back in one more time after we come back from our break. Before we do that, when we come back from our break, we're going to hear from Zach Dooley, the Reign Insider, and my co-host, plays second fiddle on the Rainy Day podcast. We'll have him next.
Wild thing.
You know what I think? I think you owe us $48.50. Wild thing.
If you ride, you get it. GEICO Motorcycle. 15 minutes could save you.
With the second selection from the Ontario Hockey League's Guelph Storm, Drew Doughty.
But what he's got a level of hockey sense that cannot be measured.
I love the game of hockey. I'll do anything to become the best player I can be. I want to be on the LA Kings. I always have been, and it's a dream come true.
He skates well, he's mobile, he handles the puck well, he has a sense of timing to jump up and make unbelievable plays.
That all just comes straight out. This guy's a Hall of Famer.
Drops it off for Doughty. Kempe back to Doughty. He scores! Doughty, a shot. He scores! Drew Doughty with the answer!
This defenseman, the way he plays, this is not an easy guy to play against.
Martin across for Doughty. Big drive. He scores!
And royalty reigns again in the NHL!
And he's just gotten better.
better and better. He's one of the special players in this league for sure.
2016 Norris Trophy goes to Drew Doughty.
Doughty over the line. Final seconds of overtime. Doughty to Foley. Save. Crawford. Doughty loose puck. They score! Kings win in overtime.
Jesse, have you heard about the Rainy Day podcast? I know I've mentioned it a few times.
I've heard of it.
I want to
yeah.
make it very clear.
That's right.
That there's this great podcast on the LA Kings Audio Network. I think, are you guys on the LA Kings Audio Network?
We are. Yeah.
All the Kings Men is? Well, Zach Dooley is the co-host of the Rainy Day podcast, and he's coming in right now. Zach, have you had a good couple days of drafting? Have you enjoyed it?
Cam, it's felt so good to be covering hockey news again. It's great to be back. And I've heard that the Rainy Day podcast is the best Ontario Reign-based podcast that records in Southern California.
That's right.
Is that true?
I've heard that as well. I've said it. So that's where I heard it, right?
Sources have told me that. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Well, I'm going to put this down. They call me the Mary Poppins of AHL broadcasters, Jesse.
They do that.
Yeah, it's been going on a while. But Zach, let's talk a little bit about what's going on inside your head, inside the Reign Insider's head for the Ontario Reign, at least as far as they're concerned. You're going to see a lot of these guys that need a little time. We talked to John Hoven about it a little bit earlier. What do you think are areas that the Reign are really going to help these players succeed in? Obviously, Jablonski this year. Where do you see some of these guys slotting in for the Ontario Reign?
Well, there's going to be a lot of jobs open with the Reign this season. You're going to see a lot of young players who are going to get roles to develop into NHL players. John Jablonski was a great hire because he worked with younger players at the National Team Development Program. He knows how to not only develop players, but he also knows how to win hockey games. He brings an exciting style of hockey to the Reign, from what he's said and from what we've heard from people around the industry. And I think that the combination of Robo with the Reign in charge and this young group of players, there's going to be a lot of opportunity. The Reign are going to be very fun to watch this year.
Zach, do we expect to see, the Reign are already loaded, as you mentioned, with a ton of young players, but do we expect to see any of the guys taken in this draft? Obviously, Quentin Byfield not available, but Helge Grans, Kasper Sementavel, Maybe Brock Faber. I'm not 100% clear on the USNTDP. Well, no, of course, Alex Turcotte could play, so he could play. I mean, how difficult would it be for somebody drafted in this year's class to crack that lineup next season?
I mean, are they eligible to play for the Reign? Many of them, the answer is yes. And if you asked me last year, would we expect to see Tobias Bjornfot in a Reign jersey for the whole year? My answer probably would have been no. And Toby was an excellent player for the Reign last year. So yes, it is possible. Would I expect to see any of these guys on the 2020-21 Reign on opening night? My guess would be no. Usually you see players 2 to 3 years after they're drafted, depending on their development path, come over to the AHL and start there. But it's certainly possible. Like I said, you wouldn't have expected to see that from a guy like Toby Bjornfot, but here we are. And Toby was maybe one of the biggest success stories from last year's Reign team.
Well, Zach, first of all, I think you're the only guy who has said U.S. national team development program very fluidly the right way on this program, on NBC Sports Anywhere. So excellent. Hats off to you. Let's talk about that team a bit, though, because the Ontario Reign's new head coach, he comes from the, I'm not even going to try it again. So he comes from the U.S. national team. So that's pretty exciting to see a lot of these players that were not directly under his tutelage, but under the program come into the Kings organization over these last couple of years. Like right now, Alex Laferriere is in the USHL, Brock Faber, the national team. Talk to us a little bit about the national team, how it works, how these players rise up with the coaching staff that they begin with as a 17-year-old.
Well, it's pretty cool. They separate them by birth year. So there's the under-17 team, the under-18 team. So like you said, Cam, Brock Faber didn't play for Robo on a regular basis. He played for Seth Appert, recently hired by the Rochester Americans. So another coach who went from that national team development program to the American Hockey League. So a really good step in, you know that you're getting good coaches at the NTDP. So Brock Faber, top 4 guy with Team USA. Very, very good skating defenseman, right-hand shot, also very good in his own end. So you're getting a guy who you don't have maybe someone like that, a right shot, who's a defensive first guy, an elite level skater in the Kings prospect pool. So I was pretty excited to see that pick. Got a couple of texts come in, people who have seen him play with Team USA who said we're getting a very good player in Brock Faber.
In the time that we've been talking to you, Zach, the Kings have gone ahead and made another pick, Martin Cromiak, who I believe is a right winger. He's been playing in the OHL, so obviously not eligible to play, but just another forward added to the ranks.
From Slovakia, so we got 5 countries.
That's right. That's right. We're turning into
pretty good.
We're going international.
That's right. But the Kings acquired a player in a trade who could play in the AHL and, in fact, already has played in the AHL, in Elias Anderson. What do we know about his AHL experience and what he might bring if he does wind up in a Reign jersey this season?
Elias has worn a lot of jerseys over the last few years. He's played in the NHL with the New York Rangers, 66 games. He's played in the AHL with the Hartford Wolfpack, and he's had some success in the AHL. It's easy to maybe judge a player's failures, but when you look at his successes, when he's been given a consistent run in the AHL, he's been like a 0.6 point per game kind of guy, which when you're looking at, what a lot of 19-year-old, 18-year-old players do in the AHL, like that's pretty good. It really is. Like you talk about how, what he hasn't done, but what he has done is play the 11th most NHL games of any player in his draft class. He's played 66 NHL games by 21. He's been a pretty decent scorer, 0.5, 0.6 point per game in the AHL. And since he's returned to Sweden, he's been nearly a point per game player in the SHL, playing against grown men in Sweden, 4 points from 4 games this year and almost a point per game last year. So you've got a guy who has proven when he gets a good run of games, he can score in a different variety of leagues, whether he's with the Kings of the Reign. I think will be sorted out in training camp this year, but very exciting get. You get a guy who was taken to the top 10 just a couple of years ago for a late 2nd round pick. I mean, that's a great flyer, I think, that the Kings took with that trade.
Zach, we're talking about the U.S. National Development Program, American players. I want to ask you, last year, 11 first-round picks, Americans. This year, only 2. Is that just parity? Why are we seeing less American prospects this year? Maybe it's John Wroblewski?
Maybe it's John Wroblewski. He just produces first-round talent. Seth Appert, more of a second-round talent kind of coach. I don't know. Maybe that's the case, but it just seems like you just never know, right? In the draft, you're seeing. I mean, you see Germany get 2 players taken in the first round plus a player in the early second. So I think it's cool that there's so many more places where elite level talent is being produced. It's great to see the U.S. players getting picked. I mean, we're Americans here on this trio of people on this show, so we like to see the U.S. players do well. But who knows? You stumped me. I wasn't prepared for that one.
Well, that's what I do, and you can always get more of that on the podcast. Well, Zach, one more before we let you go. You got married this summer. Congratulations to you and Mrs. Rain Insider. But now, here you're on day 2 of the LA Kings coverage of the 2020 NHL Draft, brought to you by GEICO. Which day would you say has been the better day in 2020?
Between the day 1 and day 2 of the draft?
No, between your wedding and being here today with us.
Well, as the lowest billed guest on this show, there had to have been a pretty impressive collection of guests that were put on before me to be ranked 6th on the draft card. I'm surprised I didn't have to go to a second card, to fit me in there. So with that in mind, I'm still going to have to say my wedding day was slightly better, but obviously, a great day today as well. You with that umbrella was an iconic image, I think, from this draft.
Yeah. No,
Zach, you're looking at it all wrong, though. We were building up to you. We teased you till the end.
The closer.
Yeah.
Mariano Rivera over there. Zach, thanks for joining us, and congrats again on the wedding to you and Mrs. Dooley from earlier this year.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Cam. And just so everyone knows, I do owe you $1, Cam, from our bet on the recent Rainy Day podcast, an all-name team player drafted by the Kings. So that those 100 pennies will be coming your way soon.
For you, Zach, thank you. Let's get John Hoven right back in here. I want to pose the same question to John, maybe a similar question about American skaters not getting taken in this first round. Again, only 2 taken in the first round this year, 11 last year, and the top, including the number 1 overall pick in Jack Hughes. John, why do you see that happening this year? What's American development? How does it differ in relation to Canadian development? What are we seeing here, 2019 to 2020?
Well, it's just the natural ebb and flow. There are years where things lean a little bit more towards the European players. There are years where the OHL dominates. There are years where the WHL has a much better showing, and the CHL in general didn't fare too well, especially in the first round last year. And they had a bounce back this year. And we're seeing more of the European players, especially the Finnish players, where they've had a lot of success at the World Junior tournament in the most recent years. And now you're seeing some of those Finnish players in that program really rise to prominence as well. So in terms of, the American squad, you just look at how the U.S. is now seen in most circles to be right there with Team Canada when it comes to the top 2 powerhouses that show up every year at the World Junior Championship. So although you didn't maybe see a lot of American-born players taken in that first round, overall, hockey in America, it's thriving. It's doing much better than it ever has. And it continues to be on the rise here over the last decade or so. And I always just point back to the success that Team USA has had at the World Junior Championships. And, here in Los Angeles, a guy like Mikey Anderson, who wore the C for Team USA when the tournament was up in Vancouver just a couple years ago. So one thing that's unfortunate would be that this year's tournament is not going to feature fans inside the building. It was a fantastic tournament up in Vancouver a couple of years ago, and the Kings have been very well represented, both of the most recent tournament in Buffalo, and where they played the outdoor game, US-Canada, that was phenomenal, and then also well represented last year in the tournament overseas. I think they set the record for the number of LA Kings prospects that were participating in the tournament. So for a lot of players to be back in that tournament this year, but nothing wrong with America and the development of players, that's for sure.
John, one final question for me. I want to double back to Elias Anderson because it is such an interesting trade. This one's more of an opinion. I don't know if you've had an opportunity to talk to anybody about the trade yet, but given his experience in the AHL, given his experience overseas, would you like to see him come and play a season with the Reign? Do you think he maybe gets a shot at wearing a Kings jersey, or do you expect him to spend another season in Europe while they sort out where he slots into the prospect pool?
Well, first off, follow up on what you said there, Jesse. I haven't had much of a chance today to, talk to all of our normal sources and make the rounds. It's been a pretty hectic day with the draft and then jumping on with you guys. But that's one of the questions that I'll be looking to answer here. I would say just off the top of my head, I'd be rather surprised if he made the LA Kings roster coming out of camp. You look at a team that's pretty full at forward right now. It's one of the reasons that, they're not going to be pursuing Trevor Lewis as an unrestricted free agent, a guy who brings veteran leadership there to that bottom 6. You just look at sort of the number of players they have. There's probably about 15, 16 guys if you include Kaliev. Now, maybe if you really wanted to include Byfield in the conversation of players that are going to try to make the team out of camp, and you only have 14 spots at forward. So I would like to see him come over and play some time at the American League level just to reacclimate himself, or I should say acclimate himself to the organization, build some relationships with some of those players that are going to be there this year. And it's really unfortunate because perhaps if he had been, in the organization a year ago, maybe he would be included with that group of players that are over bonding right now. Those on little mini subset of the Ontario Reign. You have Shaquille Thomas and Turcotte and Dudas and those guys that are over in Germany right now training together and really starting to form their bond. And perhaps he would have been part of that group. But, that's okay. We'll have to see what shakes out with training camp here over the next 60 days and what the plans would be for him. There's even, I would say, an opportunity for him to maybe finish the season in Europe and then make these decisions come next summer. I guess we'll find out. We'll start tweeting those out here over the next, 6 to 8 hours, Jesse.
Another big day for the organization here today and for the future of the LA Kings. And so I'll ask you the loaded question that everybody wants me to ask you, John. When is this team going to be competing for a Stanley Cup?
Well, it's not going to be this year. I think that for the best for the LA Kings would be to be playing meaningful games, after the trade deadline. And I think that's ultimately what's going to shape what the Kings do at the trade deadline. So I personally think that they're going to be challenging for a playoff spot this year, not only because of what we saw at the end of last season, but just things are starting to come together for this team. The dark days are behind them now, in my opinion. I think they'll be a legitimate contender for a Stanley Cup probably in 3 years. And if everything was to go in sort of a linear fashion, they'd be challenging for a playoff spot this year. They would qualify for the playoffs, maybe go a round or two the following year. And then in year 3, when you look at the maturity and the development of guys like Turcotte, guys like Mikey Anderson, guys like Gabe Vilardi, with Cal Peterson taking over and owning that net, from Jonathan Quick. I really like the LA Kings when you start to get out into year 2 and year 3. These are good times ahead here in Los Angeles. It's an exciting time to be a hockey fan.
Well, you can take a little bit of a rest maybe here tonight, but free agency starts pretty soon. And then it was nice to hear maybe a breath of fresh air. Gary Bettman talk about a January 1 target date. So a quick rest for you, John, but then you're right back on it, I think.
Well, I appreciate the time today, fellas. And yeah, it'll be nice to catch our breath here. It was dead for a couple of months, and then everything came back in full force here over the last 60 days.
That's right. Well, with that, thank you again, John. Well, with that January 1 target date, I want to take this time to thank all of our season ticket members who have hung with us through this turbulent time. And for those of you who aren't season ticket members and just Kings supporters, it's nice to have that date to look at. And we want you to be part of our family one way or another. We'd love to have you involved with the LA Kings when we come back. Who knows when it'll be, but I'm an optimist.
January 1st.
I'm a glass half full.
Said it.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
We'll see. I'll be watching them at the very least. Jesse, your closing remarks on today.
You know what? People heading into today were asking, is this the most important Kings draft in years? And my initial response when I read those questions was like, no, of course not. No draft is more important than any other. And last year was a great draft, obviously, with a ton of players. But the more I look at it with the trade, with the acquisition of Anderson, the trade of Oli Mata, some of the players they're moving on from, some of the players they're retaining, maybe I'm just an eternal optimist and I am a huge Kings fan. It does actually feel like a corner was turned today. And yesterday, over the course of the draft. I'm very optimistic. I'm very excited.
Well, it's been a good day. Still 2 picks to go. So head on over to NHL Network and go check out the rest of this draft. I want to thank all our guests, especially Quentin Byfield, who I'm sure has had a slew of media inquiries, and he had no problem joining us. I got right on the horn with him. It was no problem at all. But thanks to all our guests. I also want to thank our guys behind the camera, Chris Wallers, Don Schutte, and Trevor Rabone, for putting all this of these 2 days. Our set design is awesome. I was watching this yesterday. I was like, this is what I'm walking into. This is Ontario Reign may have a little competition next year. Right. We got to get our own video guys on some of this. Thank you all for joining us. Enjoy the rest of the draft. Have a safe and healthy rest of your year. And we're looking forward to talking to you soon. Go Kings, go.
Go Kings, go.
And we're out.
Too many days in the darkness without a glimpse of the light. Running tired and broken and scared, but I swear I'll never give up the fight. I see you broken and beat